We all have secrets, but what if your seemingly perfect life is on the brink of exposure? This chilling tale of deception, greed, and betrayal will take you through the Kissel family's journey, revealing the harrowing truth that lurks behind the facade of success. How far would you go to protect your secrets? Deception? Betrayal? Would you go as far as taking a life? As you watch and ask yourself, could this be someone you know, maybe even you? From the outside, it seemed this family had everything: a lavish lifestyle, a beautiful home, and 2 domestic helpers catering to their every need. Yet, a dark secret was brewing beneath the surface, threatening to expose the frailty of their seemingly perfect lives. As the veil of perfection was lifted, revealing the imperfections of humanity, a terrible tragedy turned their world upside down. What began as a fairy tale American dream in Hong Kong quickly spiraled into a chilling true crime story, exposing the darker truths hidden behind their privileged existence. Their tale began in the bustling city of New York, where the seeds of their relationship were sown at university. As fate would have it, the couple's love blossomed, and they soon said "I do," setting up their life together in a humble abode. Nancy's love for Robert was unshakable, and she was fiercely committed to seeing him succeed, even if it meant sacrificing her own dreams. She bravely dropped out of college to give Robert the resources he needed to climb the ladder of success, believing that their future together would more than make up for it. With hard work and dedication, Robert's career in investment banking took off, and his talents were soon recognized by Goldman Sachs, offering him a coveted position in Hong Kong. Initially hesitant, Nancy contemplated the possibilities that awaited her and their 2 daughters in Hong Kong, opportunities for a better life and a privileged lifestyle. With dreams of a brighter future, Nancy bravely agreed to take the leap and relocate to Hong Kong with her family in 2002, little realizing the sinister turn their lives would take. With the wind of success firmly at his back, Robert's career soared higher as he secured a highly coveted role as the regional manager at Merrill Lynch in Hong Kong. The fruits of his hard work were evident in his new, handsome salary of over $2 million annually, making him one of the high rollers in the financial world. But success often comes with a hefty price tag. Robert's demanding work schedule and frequent travel placed immense pressure on his family life, straining his relationship with Nancy and their children. Adding to the family dynamics in the same year, Nancy became pregnant with their 3rd child, a baby boy. With their 2 daughters enrolled in an international school, tuition covered by the company, and 2 full-time domestic helpers at their disposal, the Kissel's life seemed idyllic. Nancy, as the head volunteer of the school, enjoyed the leisure of afternoon tea at 5-star hotels and could indulge in luxury shopping sprees with her school mother friends and neighbor friends whenever she wished. Indeed, many women might have envied Nancy's lifestyle. With the picture-perfect life they had built, it was incomprehensible to imagine why the tragedy would happen to this family. According to the court's findings, there were 2 inciting incidents. The first was when Robert, eager to plan his work schedule around his son's birth, asked Nancy to have a planned cesarean section. Nancy felt this request was offensive, objecting to the idea that she should be manipulated for the sake of his convenience. A second inciting incident was during a family ski trip in Canada with Robert's sister and her family. Out of the blue, Nancy and the baby boy left the trip 2 days before New Year's Eve, leaving Robert to return to Hong Kong with their 2 daughters on New Year's Day. In court, Nancy alleged that she had suddenly left the trip because of a conflict with Robert. She claimed that he had forced her to engage in oral and anal sex, which she refused. This refusal led to a physical fight where Robert pushed her down a staircase. While away on the ski trip, Robert confided in his sister, expressing concern about the state of his marriage with Nancy. In an attempt to salvage the relationship, he had even reached out to his sister for help in finding a marriage counselor. Upon returning to Hong Kong, Robert resorted to an underhanded tactic, installing spyware on Nancy's personal laptop without her knowledge. This intrusive measure allowed him to track and monitor her computer activity, a troubling sign of the growing mistrust and paranoia within the Kissel household. The timeline jumps ahead to April 2003 when the SARS pandemic hit Hong Kong. Concerned for his family's safety, Robert arranged for Nancy and the children to go back to the States to stay at their vacation house in Vermont. In May, he joined them for about 2 weeks. While they were there, they needed to install a TV system, so they hired an electrician named Michael to do the job. As Robert returned to Hong Kong to resume his demanding work schedule, the seeds of suspicion began to take root in his mind. The thought of his wife, Nancy, interacting with another man gnawed at him, prompting him to engage the services of a private detective to unravel the truth. What he uncovered dealt a devastating blow to his trust and wounded his pride. Surveillance footage caught Nancy and the electrician Michael engaging in intimate acts at night. His worst fears were confirmed, and the betrayal he felt was nothing short of shattering. It was a complicated contrast. Nancy, with her privileged life background and access to the best that money could buy, found herself opening up to Michael, who lived a far more modest life in a mobile home park near the resort. In court, Nancy testified that she had reminded Michael of the abuse his father inflicted on his mother. This shared experience of abuse, she claimed, had bonded them. Coupled with Michael's willingness to listen and provide emotional support, this quickly blossomed into an intimate relationship. In a desperate attempt to salvage their once happy marriage, Robert flew back to Vermont in early June, remaining for a total of 8 days. Prior to his return, he penned a heart-wrenching letter, pouring his heart out to Nancy via email. The email was a raw and honest account of his love for Nancy, their children, and his desire to work through the challenges they faced as a couple. In his words, he wrote,
"Nan, I hear you on everything you said, and I agree. It's been tough on everyone. I can't imagine, though, how any of this can be fixed without communication. Communication makes the tough times easier. Neither you nor I are very good at it. We both have to try extra hard because it doesn't come easy to us. I know you said we need a third party to be involved, and I agree completely, but that doesn't mean that we don't try ourselves directly as well. Last time in Vermont was extremely difficult for both of us, as you said. I wanted to be with you and the kids and had to juggle work. It's certainly not the best situation, but life throws curveballs sometimes. I didn't care if you were temporarily mad at me or if it was something else temporary. But that was not the case. It was completely different. You were not available to me. You shut yourself off to me completely. It was very close to me not even existing. You shut yourself off to participating with the kids when I was involved. I feel like sometimes I've been almost forced into being an outsider in the family. You may not be doing this consciously, and I don't know if you realize any of this, but it is extremely painful to me. I know that you are going through a lot, but please try, as I am trying with you, to not inflict this emotional pain on me. Distance makes our issues harder. I think that you should come home earlier than planned, and we should get to work on ourselves. Please don't stress out about this week. I will try my best to make it as stress-free for you as possible. I love you, Rob."
The situation rapidly deteriorated after Robert returned to Hong Kong, with Nancy's continued communication with Michael, despite his presence in Vermont in June being the final straw for Robert. The bitter pill of betrayal led Robert to contemplate the ultimate end of their marriage, leaving him emotionally devastated. When the SARS outbreak subsided, Robert asked Nancy and their children to return to Hong Kong in late July. However, when they came back, Robert had already begun consulting with lawyers about getting a divorce. Amidst the turmoil, and despite his own suffering from chronic back pain, which even led to a hospital stay prior to Nancy's return, Robert's love and commitment to their family was evident as he picked them up from the airport himself, despite being in no condition to do so. Desperate for any form of contact with her beloved Michael, Nancy attempted to call and email him several times, but much to her despair, all of her attempts to reach him were met with resounding silence. In a desperate bid to connect with Michael, Nancy wrote a heart-wrenching letter on her laptop, printing it out and sending it by courier in the hopes that it would find its way to him. With her love for Michael all but consuming her, Nancy poured out her feelings in the letter, hoping that it would reach him and convey the depth of her yearning.
"But please know that I'm always thinking of you. I'm driving myself crazy, not speaking with you. My beloved Michael, I love you."
The mysterious events of early August seemed to add fuel to the fire of Nancy's true intentions. After Robert planned to undergo a spinal cord surgery in the States, Nancy accompanied him, allegedly in support of her husband. But in a shocking turn of events, she secretly met with Michael during their stay, unbeknownst to Robert. Adding to the suspicions, Nancy suddenly departed from the States 8 days before her husband's discharge, claiming that she needed to return to Hong Kong to prepare the children for school. The sudden departure, combined with the secret rendezvous with Michael, only deepened the mystery surrounding Nancy's motives. While she claimed that her priority was ensuring the children were ready for school, one could not help but wonder if there was something more nefarious at play. It became increasingly clear that Nancy's devotion was not with her husband, but perhaps instead with her secret lover, Michael. Robert's return to Hong Kong was greeted not with a warm embrace, but a cold chill of realization. He discovered that Nancy had conducted online searches for drugs that cause heart attacks and had penned a love letter to Michael, sending it through courier. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, and Robert remembered the strange incident of drowsiness and disorientation during the Vermont vacation after consuming whiskey. His world began to spin as he realized that this could be more than just a passing episode, but a calculated attempt to poison him. In response, Robert called his private detective in New York to share his concerns. The private detective recommended Robert undergo blood and hair testing to confirm his suspicions, but despite his fears, Robert never followed through with these tests. Perhaps he was still grappling with the prospect of his wife's infidelity and betrayal. Maybe he was reluctant to confront the possibility that he had been poisoned by his own wife, the woman he loved. Regardless, his inaction would prove tragic. In the midst of their turbulent relationship, Robert and Nancy sought help from a Hong Kong-based marriage counselor in September. Nancy later testified in court that during one of these sessions, she expressed her wish for a divorce, only to be met with a storm of anger from Robert as he abruptly stormed out of the counseling room. However, the absence of the counselor in court left this account without corroboration, casting a shadow of doubt over the veracity of Nancy's recollection of the events. The question of whether the incident truly occurred as Nancy described remained unanswered, leaving the truth obscured by the veil of unverified testimony. As the troubled couple navigated the choppy waters of their marriage through counseling, Robert shared his observations with a close friend in the States and a colleague named Mr. N. He detailed a shift in Nancy's behavior, noting her unexpected apologies, invitations to lunches, and even her willingness to come to his office to organize family photos. These overtures of reconciliation were a stark contrast to the Nancy he had grown accustomed to, suggesting a potential ulterior motive behind her sudden change of heart. Whether these gestures were genuine attempts at repairing their broken relationship or a calculated ploy remained to be seen. The promise of a fresh start seemed to dawn on Robert, buoying his hopes that the Kissel marriage might yet find its way back from the brink of collapse. But as he dug deeper, peering through the digital lens of Nancy's computer via the installed surveillance software, the harsh truth came into focus. Beneath the surface of their counseling sessions and outward displays of reconciliation lay a web of deception, with Nancy continuing to communicate and engage in flirtatious exchanges with Michael, her forbidden lover. As Robert dug deeper into the shadowy world of Nancy's deceit, a chilling web of lies began to unravel before his eyes. The search for answers led him to unearth a network of startling revelations. Nancy's alleged poisoning attempt, a hidden phone dedicated solely for Michael, and even the use of the children's school address as a smokescreen for their communications. The startling discoveries seemed to confirm Robert's worst fears. Not only was his wife unfaithful, but she was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to conceal her deception. With his heart weighed down by the crushing weight of Nancy's deceit, Robert reached a crossroads where his efforts at reconciliation had exhausted themselves. The path ahead was clear, yet fraught with anguish. Faced with a bitter reality that mocked his attempts at repairing the relationship, Robert realized that the only viable path forward was to seek a divorce, no matter the emotional toll it would take on him and his family. The decision, though agonizing, was a necessary step in reclaiming his life and dignity. For how could a marriage stand on the shaky ground of deception, manipulation, and betrayal? As Robert made the heart-wrenching decision to pursue a divorce, little did he know that it would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would shock the world and shake the foundations of his family. On the 30th of October, a fateful moment arrived, setting in motion a tragic sequence of events. The lawyer handling Robert's divorce case inadvertently sent the list of potential lawyers to the family email, a gateway that lay open to Nancy's eyes. On this same day, Nancy visited a doctor complaining of severe insomnia. As Nancy walked into the doctor's office, a specter of insomnia cloaked her being, luring her deeper into the shadows of her inner turmoil. Seeking relief from her restless nights, she was prescribed 3 types of sedative medication, each promising a soothing sedative effect. And as the doctor's pen scrawled the prescription, Nancy's mind, already spiraling from the divorce proceedings, was quietly plotting the next steps of this twisted tale. Little did she know that the pills she held in her hand would play a chilling role in the events that were about to unfold. Nancy's innermost thoughts remained shrouded in mystery, leaving us to speculate on the purpose of these sedatives, the sinister possibility that she was planning to incapacitate her husband. revisiting the alleged poisoning incident from Vermont looms large in the realm of speculation. And yet, we can only wonder if the prospect of a bitter divorce, the fear of losing her privileged lifestyle, or simply a cold-blooded desire for revenge drove Nancy to seek out these potent sedatives. Whatever the case, the stage was set for a climactic and tragic confrontation, one that would leave the Kissel family shattered. From the court judgment, the divorce lawyer revealed that a draft of the divorce arrangement had been prepared, and Robert was willing to share his fortune with Nancy and give her full custody of the children, while only requesting that he could visit them on weekends. Robert had also informed his lawyer, a good friend, and his colleague, Mr. N, of his plans to discuss the division of their assets on Sunday, November 2nd. Little did Robert know that this would be the last day of his life. On that fateful Sunday, November 2nd, the day started out seemingly ordinary. The family attended their church service in the morning, and the eldest daughter went out with friends while the second daughter had a play date with her new friend at 2 in the afternoon. Mr. T, the father of the new friend, also came along for the visit. During the 45-minute conversation between Robert and Mr. T, Nancy was in the kitchen preparing strawberry milkshake. Before Mr. T left for home, Nancy asked the girls to serve the two fathers with glasses of the milkshake, an innocent gesture, it seemed. Mr. T's recollection of this fateful milkshake was chilling. He remembered it as being exceptionally sweet, so sweet that it was hard to ignore. When questioned, Nancy casually mentioned that this sweetness was due to a secret recipe for Halloween. After Mr. T arrived home, only a few buildings away from Robert's residence, he reported feeling dizzy, sleepy, and disoriented. He later claimed to have no memory of what happened afterward. Mrs. T's testimony described her husband's condition as so severe that she believed he might have been suffering from a heart attack. He was unconscious, and even slapping his face did not wake him up. Mrs. T was on the verge of calling an ambulance when her husband briefly awakened after eating 2 tubs of ice cream, only to fall back asleep again. It seemed that something sinister was at play. Was it just a coincidence that both Mr. T and Robert drank the milkshake and both experienced the same disorientation and unconsciousness? The grim tale continued to unfold as surveillance footage and the testimony of Mr. N shed more light on the afternoon of November 2nd. At approximately 4 p.m., security cameras captured Robert escorting his son to the residential complex's playroom. Moments later, he made a phone call to Mr. N, during which they discussed arrangements for an upcoming conference call that night. However, what should have been a straightforward conversation was overshadowed by Robert's persistent complaints of dizziness, sleepiness, and disorientation. Robert's fate was sealed in that fateful phone call with Mr. N, their discussion punctuated by Robert's disorientation. What Mr. N could not have known then was that these signs were harbingers of a sinister plot that mirrored the events of their Vermont vacation, where Robert's wife had allegedly attempted to poison him. Robert was helplessly succumbing to the same fate he had narrowly escaped months earlier. Time ticked on, and surveillance footage captured Robert's return home at 5:15 p.m., a seemingly ordinary moment in an otherwise unremarkable day. But Nancy's behavior was far from ordinary. 1 hour later, as the domestic helper and the children arrived at the apartment, she demanded silence. "Be quiet," she whispered. "Your father is sleeping." The request, innocuous on the surface, belied a deeper mystery. Why was Nancy so insistent on keeping the household silent? The next day, Nancy prevented the domestic helper from cleaning the master bedroom. After sending her children to school, Nancy went to a nearby shopping arcade where she purchased bleach, towels, bedding, and a large area rug. She also purchased a small sofa for the bedroom and requested carton boxes from an overseas relocation company for delivery the following day. During this time, Nancy instructed her domestic helpers to purchase large quantities of peppermint oil, more towels, adhesive tape, and rope. Indeed, the collection of these seemingly innocuous items, when considered in their totality, only served to heighten the already palpable sense of unease. And as the pieces of this puzzle began to fall into place, it became increasingly evident that Nancy's actions were driven by something more sinister than a mere housekeeping project. The ominous question remained: what exactly was she planning? As the timeline of events unraveled, Nancy's calculated evasions began to weave a web of deception, leaving those closest to Robert in a state of mounting unease. Mr. N's queries were met with Nancy's deflective explanations, painting a portrait of Robert's sudden absence. As the hours ticked by and his whereabouts remained shrouded in mystery, a sense of growing apprehension gnawed at those who knew him. With Robert's colleagues unable to reach him and his wife's behavior growing increasingly suspicious, the seeds of fear were planted. As Nancy clung to her fabricated tale, weaving a thicker and more elaborate web of deceit, the timeline of events twisted into a maze of lies. 3 days had passed, and still, there was no sign of Robert, no word from him. Mr. N's concern continued to rise, but Nancy maintained her story, feigning an unflappable calm. But when Robert's best friend from the U.S. reached out, the carefully spun tale suddenly unraveled. In a desperate bid to maintain her deception, Nancy quickly transformed her narrative. In the blink of an eye, the tale of her husband's absence due to family issues was replaced with a tale of domestic violence. She claimed Robert had assaulted her, fracturing her ribs before storming out of the house. Despite her new claim, the truth struggled to break free from its confines. For, in the midst of her deception, Nancy revealed a truth she had no intention of hiding: her plans for breast augmentation surgery in New York. Nancy's narrative began to fray, unraveling before the incredulous eyes of Robert's friends. Time marched on, each passing day only deepening the concern held by those closest to him. With the knowledge of his impending divorce settlement negotiations looming heavy in their minds, their doubts were fueled by Nancy's shifting explanations. Her claims of Robert's absence to handle family matters rang increasingly hollow, unable to satisfy the gnawing suspicion that something more nefarious was at play. The suspicions lingered, festering like an infection that could not be suppressed. As Nancy's story frayed and fractured like the very ribs she claimed Robert had broken, Mr. N and Robert's best friend were pushed to their limits. Well, their mounting fear and distrust of Nancy's account led them to take action. In the afternoon of November 6th, a full 4 days after Robert's disappearance, they officially reported him missing to the police. But it seemed Nancy had been one step ahead of them. With an almost calculated foresight, she had already reported Robert's absence to the police earlier that morning, adding fuel to the flames of the friends' suspicion. As Nancy's calculated web of lies grew ever more tangled, the police found themselves in the midst of an intricate puzzle. The police, once alerted, began their investigation. Nancy, displaying a disturbing sense of composure, even visited a doctor to have her alleged fractured ribs examined, claiming that she had been brutally assaulted by Robert before his disappearance. The doctor noted that while she did have visible bruises, her ribs were not in fact broken. Nevertheless, Nancy's harrowing tale only served to deepen the sense of suspicion that was now mounting among the police and Robert's friends. While Nancy may have carefully crafted her narrative, her tale was crumbling under the weight of scrutiny. The doctor's report revealed that her claimed injuries were far from the grave situation she had described. Her wounds were minor, more akin to scrapes than the brutal assault she had portrayed. The absence of a fractured rib and her retraction of her initial rape accusation only served to erode the credibility of her story. Nancy's performance, initially so skillfully executed, was beginning to unravel before the eyes of the police and those who had known Robert. In the evening of the same day, as the police began their investigation into Robert's disappearance, they visited the management office of the residential complex where the family lived. There, they sought information about the family's movements and any potentially relevant details. The staff at the management office informed the police that Nancy had requested assistance in moving items to their rented storage room on November 4th, the second day after the murder. 4 staff members from the management office had carried out the removal work, and the property supervisor reported to Nancy that they detected a strong smell of salted fish coming from the rug. Nancy's abrupt silence in response to the question about the smell, coupled with her haste in closing the door, could not have escaped the police's notice. It was yet another clue pointing toward the deepening mystery of Robert's disappearance. The strong smell of salted fish emanating from the rug was a detail that seemed out of place, a suspicious piece of the puzzle that only served to compound the growing list of questions surrounding Nancy's behavior. The police wasted no time in applying for a search warrant. With the unsettling story provided by the staff at the management office, they suspected that Nancy was hiding something. Late that evening, the police arrived at Nancy's residence with the warrant in hand. When questioned, Nancy stuck to her story, claiming that Robert had asked for a divorce that very day and that they were fighting over custody of their 3 children. Nancy claimed that, in self-defense, she grabbed a lead display scripture to protect herself from Robert, who was wielding a wooden baseball bat. Nancy's narrative was clearly becoming more and more elaborate, as if she were spinning a yarn to cover up her own complicity. The police, Having already been made aware of the uncanny coincidences and inconsistencies in Nancy's earlier statements, were far from convinced. Her story was now so tangled with details and peculiarities, it seemed that at any moment, it could unravel completely. The lingering question remained: what, if anything, did Nancy truly know about Robert's disappearance? The investigators found themselves face to face with a scene that spoke volumes without uttering a word. As they entered the master bedroom, they were confronted with the unmistakable signs of a hasty cover-up. The room was in disarray, with boxes and bags strewn about and clothing stuffed into the bathtub. This chaotic mess bore the hallmarks of a desperate attempt to conceal the truth, raising even more questions about Nancy's story and her potential involvement in Robert's disappearance. It was clear that they were dealing with more than just a case of a missing person. The shadows of doubt crept into the investigators' minds, casting a dark cloud over Nancy's story. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them as they stood in the disheveled bedroom, the air thick with the tang of something amiss. Pressing Nancy for further details, they unearthed an explanation that did little to quell their unease. Her sudden decision to flee the city, purportedly to escape abuse, struck a discordant note in the melody of her narrative. How could such a drastic decision be made in such a short time span? Nancy's web of deceit began to unravel, thread by thread, as the officers pulled at the loose ends of her story. With growing skepticism, the investigators turned their attention to her physical injuries. As they asked her to reenact the alleged assault, they quickly observed that her wounds did not align with her account of events, leading them to question the veracity of her claim. It was becoming increasingly clear that Nancy's story was not as straightforward as it had seemed. The gaps, inconsistencies, and implausibilities only added to the mounting suspicion. The discord between Nancy's story and reality rang louder than ever, as the officers pressed for the truth. "Did you rent a storage room in this building?" they asked, a hint of suspicion in their voices. Nancy, cool and collected, answered calmly, "No, I did not." But the evidence from the management office told a different tale, and as they confronted her with the information, her resistance began to crumble. After a hushed conversation with her father, who was present in the home, she relented and handed over the key to the storage unit. With the key in hand, the officers prepared to uncover the truth that Nancy had tried so desperately to hide. But as they proposed accompanying Nancy to the storage unit, she refused, citing emotional distress as the reason. This resistance served only to fuel their belief that something incriminating was waiting to be found. The small, shiny object in their hands became a symbol of the unanswered questions and untruths that surrounded Robert's disappearance, and the officers were determined to unravel the mystery, one keyhole at a time. As the police unlocked the storage unit, an overpowering stench of rotting flesh assailed their nostrils. Hidden within the space was Robert's body. His head was wrapped in a garbage bag, and the rest of him had been stuffed into a sleeping bag before being tightly bound with ropes, cushions, and an area rug. The gruesome discovery confirmed the officers' worst suspicions. With Robert's lifeless body now exposed, Nancy's attempts to evade responsibility for his disappearance had failed. The moment of truth had finally come for Nancy. As she stood before the officers, her carefully constructed web of deceit was torn to shreds. She was arrested on the spot, the ruthless reality of her actions now exposed. Nancy's efforts to maintain the illusion of innocence had failed, and her guilt now hung over her like a heavy, inescapable cloak. Under interrogation, Nancy confessed to killing her husband. She defended her actions by claiming that Robert had provoked her by saying that she was unfit to care for their children and that he would take custody of them. Nancy alleged that they had gotten into a heated argument, during which Robert had beaten her with a wooden baseball bat. Desperate to distance herself from culpability, Nancy made another disturbing assertion. She claimed that she had been repeatedly coerced by Robert into performing oral and anal sex when he was under the influence of drugs and alcohol. With every layer of the story peeling away, a darker, more sinister truth was beginning to emerge. Nancy's claims of abuse, while horrific if true, were now shrouded in uncertainty. Her allegation of Robert's sexual coercion, while abhorrent if factual, was now tainted by her own history of falsehoods. The investigators, while duty-bound to consider all claims seriously, were left struggling to separate fact from fiction in the midst of Nancy's intricate deception. With the potential consequences of her actions bearing down on her, Nancy presented her case to the court, pleading for their consideration. She urged them to take into account the prolonged and horrific sexual abuse she had allegedly endured, arguing that her actions were born of self-defense and desperation rather than malicious intent. The intricacies of her defense, however, proved to be a delicate balancing act for the court. While her claims, if true, could lend credence to her plea, the brutality of the crime and her calculated efforts to conceal the body could not be ignored. The forensic report unveiled a chilling portrait of premeditated murder. Robert's injuries, caused by 5 consecutive blows to the head with an object weighing approximately 8 pounds, were so severe that his brain was embedded in the fractured bone of his skull. The lack of defensive wounds and the position in which he was lying when he was attacked, prone and likely unconscious, strongly suggested that Robert was incapacitated before being brutally assaulted. The viciousness of the attack, paired with the calculated efforts to conceal the body, painted a grim picture of Nancy's culpability. As the investigation uncovered more and more damning evidence, a sinister plot began to emerge. The toxicology report revealed a disturbing find. Robert's body contained 5 different sleeping and sedative medications, 4 of which were prescribed to Nancy by 2 separate doctors in the month preceding his death. This discovery painted a chilling picture. Nancy had been methodically amassing a cache of drugs, seemingly with the purpose of drugging her husband and rendering him helpless before carrying out her deadly scheme. The image of Nancy's intricate plot came into sharper focus as the trial continued, with the discovery of Robert's net worth and his sister's testimony revealing Nancy's chilling motive. With an estimated net worth of $18 million, Robert had made Nancy the primary beneficiary of his estate, a decision that raised alarm bells with his sister, who had cautioned him to amend his will. But Robert, perhaps blinded by his love for Nancy or simply unaware of her true intentions, failed to make any changes. The trial continued, the twisted threads of Nancy's machinations gradually unraveling in the courtroom, her plan to gain control of Robert's fortune finally brought to light. With her intricate plot foiled by the Slayer rule, Nancy's hopes of reaping the rewards of Robert's sizable fortune were dashed, the law ensuring that justice would prevail. The doctrine, often referred to as the Slayer rule, is a safeguard that prevents the perpetrators of crimes from profiting from their heinous acts. Nancy's web of deception had unraveled, the consequences of her actions far more dire than she could have ever imagined. As she was led away to serve her life sentence, Nancy faced a life of imprisonment, a bleak future devoid of the freedom and comfort she had grown accustomed to. Yet perhaps the most devastating consequence was the alienation from her children, who were not only faced with the loss of their father, but also had to grapple with the revelation that their own mother was capable of such a heinous crime. The disparity between Nancy's portrayal of Robert as an abusive, unstable, and aggressive individual and the testimonies of his colleagues, domestic helpers, and even the lack of corroborating evidence on his personal computers highlighted a significant inconsistency in her narrative. Those who knew Robert described him as a composed and considerate man, one who only drank socially and never exhibited signs of a drinking problem. The absence of any evidence of drug use or deviant sexual behavior on his computers further contradicted Nancy's claims, raising the possibility that she had fabricated the allegations in an attempt to garner sympathy and evade responsibility for the murder. Nancy's claims of abuse, coercion, and self-defense had been cast into doubt by a mounting body of contradictory evidence, indicating that she may have resorted to manipulation and deceit in an attempt to obscure the truth and avoid accountability for her actions. The court heard conflicting versions of an incident during a family trip to Indonesia, with Nancy claiming Robert had reacted aggressively and caused injury to their child, while the domestic helper testified that the injury was the result of the children's rough play. This cast further doubt on Nancy's portrayal of Robert as abusive, while also highlighting the possibility that she had fabricated the story in order to gain sympathy and support her claims. Nancy's unyielding pursuit of freedom was met with continual rejection, as her appeals were consistently dismissed by the courts. Despite her efforts, her appeals were fruitless and she was left to serve out her life sentence behind bars. Her numerous appeals, including the retrial and sentencing review, ultimately proved unsuccessful, and Nancy was forced to come to terms with the inescapable reality of her imprisonment and the permanent separation from her children, left to live with the haunting consequences of her crimes. Unconfirmed reports of Nancy's continued correspondence with her lover Michael during her time in prison have generated public interest and speculation, but remain unsubstantiated. According to these accounts, Michael eventually married another woman and requested that the Hong Kong prison cease delivering Nancy's letters to him. However, these claims are merely hearsay, and their validity cannot be confirmed without input from either Nancy or Michael. As such, these purported details of Nancy's life in prison are open to interpretation and remain the subject of conjecture in the public eye. The lives of Robert's children were drastically altered in the aftermath of their mother's imprisonment, causing them to experience significant upheaval and heartache. Initially taken in by their maternal grandfather, they were later handed over to Nancy's half-brother. However, Robert's father sought to regain custody of the children, enlisting the help of his eldest son in the U.S. to bring them back. Tragically, Robert's brother, while successful in reuniting the children with their family in the U.S., was himself murdered years later. The aftermath of the murder was far-reaching, impacting not just Nancy and her children, but also the extended family. Robert's sister took on the responsibility of raising the children, ensuring they were provided for financially through Robert's assets and allowances. Despite the attempts of both families to provide some semblance of stability and normalcy for the children, the trauma of losing both parents in such tragic circumstances would undoubtedly leave lasting scars. In the years following Nancy's conviction, she seemingly remained unrepentant, claiming in an interview with the British Daily Mail online newspaper that she had no regrets over her actions. For the three children, Nancy stated that they need to heal from something they will never understand. Nancy's apparent lack of remorse and her suggestion that her children will never understand the situation they endured highlights the profound impact of the murder on the family. The children, now grown, have been left to navigate their way through life with the weight of their past. While they may never fully comprehend the tragedy that befell their family, they have had to find their own ways to heal and move forward. Nancy's callous disregard for her husband's well-being and the fact that she prioritized a cosmetic procedure over his whereabouts raised serious questions about her character and motivations. Nancy's willingness to discard her marriage, the father of her children, and the hard-earned life they had built together, all for a brief affair, seems to indicate a deep-seated sense of entitlement and a disconnect from the value of commitment and sacrifice in a long-term relationship. Moreover, her actions reveal a complete lack of empathy and compassion towards the people in her life, a trait that is deeply concerning. Indeed, Nancy's insatiable greed seemed to trump any sense of empathy or concern for the ramifications of her actions. Murdering her husband to gain his fortune was a more appealing option to her than the potential financial benefits of a divorce, revealing a chilling lack of compassion and a disturbingly transactional view of human relationships. Nancy's chilling level of detachment in the aftermath of her husband's death, living with his corpse in their bedroom for 2 days and continuing to function normally in front of friends and family, is a deeply disturbing aspect of this case. This behavior highlights an alarming lack of empathy and a disturbingly blasé attitude towards the life of her husband and the sanctity of their home. The enigma surrounding Nancy's true motive for murdering her husband leaves us with more questions than answers. Was it for financial gain? A desire for a new life? Or perhaps a mix of complex emotions? Only Nancy can truly know the truth behind her actions. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of violence and dishonesty. I hope that Robert's children continue to support one another and lead healthy, happy lives despite the trauma they endured. As we reflect on this case, may we be reminded of the importance of empathy, honesty, and compassion in our own relationships.